there was no English spoken at the time. Things were bad. People didn't have work. The Japanese commercials, from a very objective, very kind of, I would say, global perspective, felt a little cheap. Here, they build these relationships over the course of 20, 30 years. Japan, at the time, I felt didn't have very high production value in commercials.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Tobi, and today we welcome Ryan, founder of Cutter Studio, a global but based out of Tokyo media production company.
Cutter Studios is global. I'm not the founder of Cutter Studios globally. I just founded the Tokyo operation in 2012.
So you're running the media production company out of Tokyo, and you've been working on a lot of global projects from there, but also a lot domestically.
I'd say that our work it started domestic and it's moved to global over the course of our 12 years on the market. We did a lot of domestic work probably in our first 5 or 6 years, and then started to realize that the better, maybe higher profile, higher budget work was actually the global work.
So a lot of experience in media production, and we're going to dive into that. But first, I want to know a little bit, what brought you to Japan? You mentioned to me over email that you actually came for the first time in 1989? 1989,
yes. So I was in junior high school, and a lot of people don't remember this. A lot of people maybe aren't old enough to remember it, but in 1989, it was the heart of the bubble, the peak of the bubble, and Americans were getting very concerned that if you don't speak Japanese or if you don't, have relations with Japan, that you're not going to have a future. This is when Honda was had opened their plant in the U.S. And so the school started to teach Japanese. And I went on a short exchange program to Japan after learning a bit of Japanese at school. And then after that, it kind of just followed me. It wasn't like I decided that I was going to live in Japan at 11 years old, but when you are the kid that goes to Japan, you come back, and then you're the kid that everyone, they have a question about Japan, need to know something about Japan, and they come to you.
Because you'd been there.
Because and I must be the expert. So yeah, that was my first tour.
It's interesting how it changed, because when I went to school, it was the same, but with China. Everyone was like, you have to study Chinese because all the business opportunities will be coming out of China, and nobody was talking about Japan anymore.
No one was talking about Japan anymore. And I'm curious now, is it still China?
I think probably it's shifting again because of geopolitics and other things, but I'm curious about your first impression. Do you still remember that first time you came to Japan and you arrived here as a kid and you were like, wow? Well,
first it was my first experience with jet lag. Coming all the way over here and waking up at 4 a.m. I did a homestay in Niigata. It was right in the middle of the summer. It was this hot. And so just that heat, waking up at 4 a.m, having literally, I think that people that have lived here for a long time might not realize it because it's kind of gradually come about, but there was no English spoken at the time. I mean, literally zero. My host family spoke nothing. So there was the cultural, the physical, the weather, everything, all sorts of hurdles in the beginning. I went to a Japanese junior high school.
In the countryside?
In the countryside, in Niigata. And they just put me in the class. They sat me down. One day, they took me aside with a teacher to teach me katakana and hiragana, which I learned in one day.
That's a fast learning session.
It was an intense learning session. And yeah, it wasn't very long. I think I was there maybe a couple of months and then back to the US. But there was definitely a spark. There was an interest. There was something that I felt that could be unique about me. So I continued studied through high school, and then I came back here for college.
What did you end up studying here in Japan?
I studied politics, but I wouldn't say that I was the best student. It was more about kind of being here and experiencing the culture.
So no particular interested in going down that path.
The politics path?
Yeah. And
well, I use politics every day.
In a way, yes.
In a way.
Yeah. It's omnipresent, no matter what you do. But that's interesting because then you had this young experience and then you decide to come back to Japan despite the bubble having already kind of popped more or less.
The bubble had popped. I mean, it was when I went to college, it was 1997. But like I said, it was something that, Japan was kind of my thing. It had followed me. I was in high school in Switzerland, so I kind of was already comfortable with being outside of the country. I looked at some schools in Germany, looked at some schools in the US, and I wanted to be in a city. Tokyo is still a super exciting city. So I didn't, I think when you're that age, you think about things in very superficial ways. And it was big city, really far away from Chicago, where I was born. And it felt like something unique.
Did you know at that time what you wanted to do or after your studies, or were you just enjoying time in Japan?
My full disclosure, my dad was the one who started Cutter Studios in Chicago.
Okay.
He started the business in 1980, and just being as father-son relationships are, I decided that I wanted to do something completely the opposite of that. And so after graduation, I joined a marketing company here in Tokyo. I was there for, I think, a year and a half, and it was not exactly what I expected. I was expecting something a little bit more creative. So at that point, I realized that maybe my dad was kind of onto something. And I asked him if I could come back to Chicago and start at the company. And he said, yes, but you have to be an intern. So
start at the bottom.
I started at the bottom, started as an intern and worked my way up. And then eventually worked from Chicago to LA. And I was in LA for about 6-7 years before coming over here to start Cutter Studios here.
Before we get into Cutter Studio, you told me that you worked as an interpreter.
Yes.
For Tadahito Iguchi, a Major League Baseball player from 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
How did that come to be, and what's it like as an interpreter for a baseball player, professional?
So it was, it came about because I was actually working on the commercials for the Chicago White Sox in Chicago. For whatever reason. I mean, you think of a baseball team and you think of these huge organizations, but they're actually quite small.
Really?
Yeah, and the front office is, I don't know the actual number of people that work there, but it's not a particular big office. It's in the actual stadium, and so the people that handle a lot of the stuff with the players are also handling the commercials. They're handling the marketing side, and so one of the people that was involved with the marketing was also involved in finding the interpreters for the Japanese players. Iguchi happened to be looking for an interpreter. They happened to find out that I spoke Japanese. They had absolutely no one else that they could ask to do the job. They, literally had 0 resumes. They offered me the opportunity, and it sounded like something I wanted to try.
So then for the entire season, you basically fly everywhere to all the games. And like we saw in the news recently with Otani's interpreter, you stand next to him in interviews and kind of translate everything to and from.
It's interesting. I mean, the job, they say interpreter, but it's very little interpreting. You're essentially kind of a hired friend. So you got this guy that comes from Japan, knows nobody, probably isn't that familiar with the language, and they're able to build it into their contracts. So my job, yes, I interpreted on the rare occasions when there was a press interview or something like that, but you don't interpret baseball. The hitting coach doesn't come up and say, hey, I need you to work with Iguchi on this or that. I mean, they talk in this nonverbal baseball language, and they don't need me for that. So the interesting thing about the job is that there is no role of interpreter in Major League Baseball.
Okay.
It does not exist. Because to be an interpreter, it could if you were in the front office, but you have to be on the bench. And if you're going to be on the bench, you have to be a coach. So the role is actually that of a coach. You wear the uniform, you practice with the team, and that's the majority of the job. So in that respect, that was super awesome.
Cool. So you're not actually allowed to be on the bench with the players in a stadium unless you're part of the official coaching staff.
Unless you're a coach. And so it's still kind of a gray area. I mean, I suppose that there probably are people that complain every once in a while. And for example, the Spanish-speaking players, they don't have interpreters. It's only probably the Japanese and maybe the few Korean and Chinese players that are in the major leagues.
And you did that for one entire season?
I did that for two entire seasons.
Do you have any kind of good memories, some stories that really stuck with you, where like this moment was awesome to witness?
Well, winning the World Series. That was, I mean, I've been a baseball fan forever. I was a White Sox fan forever. White Sox won the World Series that year in my first year for the first time in 88 years. So I hadn't been able to see it, obviously. My dad hadn't been able to see it. And he's been a White Sox fan since he was a kid.
And you've been on the bench.
And I was on the bench, and being on the bench and also being in that position with the coach means I get tickets. So I was able to get tickets for my dad, for friends and family, for all the postseason and World Series games. And I think that was probably the most special, to be able to, and you know, my dad traveled to Boston, traveled to Houston for all the postseason games.
And eventually, were you able to manage working with your dad still on Coda Studio and the kind of campaigns and productions you were having there, and as an interpreter? Or you kind of did you put this on hold for?
I put it on hold.
And I assume Iguchi may have left the White Sox, and
yes.
then you kind of went back to.
So Iguchi moved to, where did he move after that? Was he moved to the Phillies? I think it was first the Phillies, then to San Diego, or it was the other way around. I can't remember which one. But when he made that move, it was kind of. I had been hinting at the fact that I needed to get back to my real job. It was being an interpreter, you don't have a lot to do. You're on the field practicing. And so at the time, the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf, and the general manager, Kenny Williams, they're like, can we find something for you to do? And Jerry Reinsdorf introduced me to a guy named Alan Nero, who was a longtime agent. And Alan wanted me to come on board and be a scout and agent, eventually agent for them. And I thought about it. I mean, a life as a sports agent is not terrible.
And you're a fan of the White Sox already?
I was a fan of the White Sox. But it wasn't for me. I wanted to be in a creative industry, and I couldn't see that being something that was going to be fulfilling for me. And in the world of sports, you have this thing. It's like you're either player or you are... The word they use is jock sniffer. You familiar?
So you kind of find the potential players and you kind of work with them to make them successful?
Yes, but what I meant by that was that the jock sniffer is essentially anybody in the world of sports, specifically the world of baseball, is either player or wanted to be player, wants to be player, couldn't become player.
I see.
And that's the entire dynamic. So if you're not completely enthralled with the players, you don't fit into the dynamic. You don't fit into into that
universe.
How do you put it? Like it's like, you know, like we're like humans, we need food and we need water, and that's how the entire universe is kind of created. In the baseball world, it is you adore the players, and that's how the world kind of it all works. And if you don't want to be a baseball player, if that's not what you consider to be the pinnacle of existence, then people don't understand you. So it's not a world that you can spend a lot of time in if you ultimately want to do something else.
You have to give up your life to it or move on to something else.
Exactly. It's very insular. I mean, that's why they have that term in the U.S. They call it inside baseball. I don't know. Have you ever heard that?
It's like the jock sniffer is not really something I'm too familiar. Coming from Europe, baseball is not something very big, but in Japan it is.
In Japan it is. I mean, I'm sure there's probably soccer might have its own terminology, but yeah, I mean, baseball I think is very special in being super insular, super clubby.
And after your 2 years, it was time for you to get out of that island and back to the creative side and kind of go back to Kura Studio?
Yeah, I mean, it got to the point where I was, I was starting to do projects on my own when I could.
I'm curious because your father's company was based out of Chicago, and you were a successful media production company there. Why decide to suddenly open this new branch, Kura Studio, in Tokyo? Yeah.
Number of factors. That's kind of the story of everything. Is there's a number of converging factors. I moved to LA 2008, 2009. It was the financial crisis. Mm-hmm. Things were bad. People didn't have work. LA was. Don't know how familiar you are with the way that things are set up in the U.S., but most of the advertising agencies are in Chicago or New York or the big. Those are the big ad markets. Mm-hmm. LA doesn't have a lot of agencies. Really? LA has a lot of work because the production is there. Mm-hmm. But at the time when things were being squeezed, people were trying to take that work and bring it back to their, especially if you're talking post-production, to bring it back to their home markets so that they could save costs. And so most of the creative people on that market were looking for opportunities east. They were looking for opportunities in Chicago, looking for opportunities in Dallas, looking for opportunities in New York. And I thought, well, if everybody is going that way, I might try the other way. On top of that, I had met a girl. It's kind of a bit of a common story, but met a girl, Japanese girl in LA. She ended up becoming my wife and his mother.
Our guest, our extra guest on the podcast.
And she liked the idea. You know, it was a big, kind of hairy, crazy idea to go to Japan and take this business that was very American and go and start it in Japan. We underestimated every challenge that we could possibly encounter. But I don't think if we had considered all of those challenges at the time that we would have actually done it.
That's usually how it is, isn't it?
Right.
If you start thinking about all the problems that may happen, you just don't get started.
Exactly.
And if you get started, then you just figure out the problems as they come. So what was the first challenge?
Still figuring them out. Well, okay, so
when you arrived.
The first challenge. Well, the first challenge is probably still the challenge, and that is figuring out how it works. And so one of the things that I learned the hard way was when I came to the market, and I'm like, okay, the Japan at the time, I felt didn't have very high production value in commercials. The question I failed to ask myself was why.
So for people that are maybe not so familiar with this field, what do you mean by production value?
The look and feel. Does it look like it costs a lot of money? Does it look like it's of high value? Does it look like it is creatively executed? The Japanese commercials, from a very objective, very kind of, I would say, global perspective, felt a little cheap. Mm-hmm. The executions felt cheap. They were, it was a little bit more what they call the bubblegum approach, where it's chew it up, spit it out, then redo it next week. And so looking at that, we assumed that they would be looking for the Hollywood production value that we could provide. So very naive, very confident, came to the market. And when you shop things around, as I'm sure you know, in Japan, everybody tells you that they're interested. And there is that initial interest. It's like it's Shake Shack's line down the block when they first open. But to create that lasting need, create that lasting demand, you have to figure out what it really is that they want. And I think that, through the years, and I'm still figuring that out, I still don't, if people ask me, for advice, they're asked to consult about Japan all the time, and the first thing that I say is, I haven't figured it out yet. But one thing that I will say is very, very different in Japan, in the Japanese commercial production world, the advertising world versus the American advertising world, is the need for the best, the need for greatness. So if you're an advertising executive in the US, you have to do incredible work in order to keep your job. Here, you have to do as good as the guy before you and not really, really screw up, and you keep your job. And that's a very different dynamic.
In the US, if you mess up, suddenly your boxes are packed and you take them home the same day, right?
Exactly.
In Japan, you have more labor laws protecting the employees, and you can't just get rid of someone if they simply don't perform over the top.
I think it's that. I think it's also cultural. Process is more. I think that there's a greater importance placed on process versus results. If you are working with a team and you have a good experience with that team and you deliver at the end of the day 75, 80%, that's considered a good result. You don't have to deliver 95%. But I think in the US, there is that drive to deliver 95%. Not only that, but if you are, let's say that you're an advertising creative, you want to be working with the best production company, the best director. You want to be able to hang that, put that accolade on your shelf. Here, they build these relationships over the course of 20, 30 years. And these people, they're not interested in giving that up, moving on to the newest shiny thing and risking all of what they have built. It doesn't, the merit's not there, the benefit's not there. So us being that new shiny thing on the market, we thought, okay, here it is, look what we can do, give us the work. And that worked for a little bit. I think that it's that initial interest that makes it even the more perplexing. So we learned, it took a long time. I learned that process and communication in Japan is at least twice as important as it is in the US. And it's, I don't see a heck of a lot of companies that have really nailed that niche here in any industry, but particularly in ours.
I'm curious about this experience that you brought from the United States, and you had this very high production value and this kind of, you mentioned, I think, Hollywood filmmaking based approach to commercial filmmaking, and you brought that to Japan. What were the clients then actually interested from this, which was different from this very, you said, bubblegum ads that they were doing here in Japan? And you bring that, what did you see was an interest in? How did they perceive that value that you were bringing? Did they have any, let me rephrase that, did they have any specific aspect of it where they also saw, oh, this could really improve our company if we have commercials at this level, as opposed to the cheaper produced, you do every week a new one that was coming out? Did they see it the same way you did eventually?
I think everyone sees it. One of the realities that we deal with is we're not dealing with the end clients. We're not dealing with the end beneficiary. So if you are making a commercial for Toyota, the end beneficiary is Toyota, but you're dealing with, you could be dealing with a production company middleman. Even a lot of times, because we're small, we deal with another production company. We'll be dealing with the agency. And then you're dealing with and then that goes through to the marketing department at the client side. So the people that are interpreting the value are somewhat removed from the actual beneficiary. They do see the benefit from a creative perspective. And so very quickly people would say, okay, yes, you empower, to get into the weeds, one of the biggest differences between Japanese production and American production. When I say American production, it's because that's what I know, but I would probably open that up to American, European, Western. One of the biggest differences is the distribution of power, distribution of authority. Who
makes a decision in the process?
Exactly. So in Japan, you have a director That's it. In the US, you're going to have these departments. You're going to have your art department. You're going to have your sound department. You're going to have these departments exist in Japan, but they don't really they're not accountable for the finished product. In Japan or in the US, there's this real pride. For example, in the film world, you generally have a production designer. In Japan, you don't really have production designers. You have a director who talks to an art director.
Okay.
So the director will talk directly to the art director and say, possibly give them a sketch and say, build this, versus a production designer who is going to build the look of the film and own it. It's going to be what they do. They're going to choose the locations. They're going to choose whether to shoot on location or to shoot on a studio. On a sound stage. And that ownership creates a bit of a safety net. So let's say that director, gets sick, falls over, has a bad day, has a lapse of judgment. You've got other people that are holding up the house as well. They're also very good at their job, so they create that production value. This comes in the form, and there's like the standouts. I think editing is huge. Editing in Japan, as I learned when we first came over here, was really an operator who sits next to a director and presses buttons, whereas an editor in the US is somebody who is in charge of that edit, in charge of how that story is told in the imagery and sound. And that ownership, I think, is very different, and people can see that. The end clients, the people that you're working with directly, they can see that, they see the value, they see why it's important. The question is whether they're willing to pay for it. And so I think to a certain extent, creativity is considered a luxury in Japan.
Interesting.
It's not something that, if you are a small foreman, let's say, for example, you have a restaurant that has 4 seats and you're going to source all of the ingredients for your restaurant, you are going to make every dish, and you're going to serve every customer, you have a great deal of control. And in that business, I think Japan has a really high level of creativity. But when you take that creativity and you try to deliver it at scale, you try to deliver it as a large corporation, you have so many different layers, and those layers are each questioning what really is important. And when it comes down to it, their lifetime employment is what's important. Whether or not any creativity is risk. Anytime that you push the envelope, anytime that you try to do something that hasn't been done before, there is an inherent risk in that. And risk, you look at the penalty for failure in Japan. In the US, we have this thing. It's like, I failed, and you wear it as a badge of honor, and you dust yourself off, and you try it again. If you wanted to go get money from a VC for a new startup, they're not going to give you any money if you've never failed before. You can't tell them that story about how you screwed up and you learned from it and you did it again. And in Japan, not so much. I find that failure really is the end. It's like I've failed. Quit.
So how do you adapt then? Because you're used to producing things in a very different way, because you used to work with those people that are very independent in the editing process, the sound process, and have maybe less processes. But suddenly you have to produce and work with those intermediary. You have to kind of adapt to their process to deliver to your new end clients at Toyota, for example. Are you able to produce the same quality commercials by changing completely the process and adapting to their way of doing things? Or were you able to just establish your team the way you wanted it and to kind of create and be creative the way you were used to it, and then still just deliver that to the client? Were they kind of at all imposing you to change your way of working on things when you moved to Japan?
The answer to that wasn't exactly the ideal situation. So what we ended up doing is finding our ICP. And our ICP is so it's either the foreign brand, the global brand that is looking to market in Japan. They have essentially the same values as we do to start with, and they're looking for that applied on the market here. Or it's Japanese brands, the global departments of Japanese brands that are marketing overseas. So, for example, ANA, All Nippon Airways, I do work for them, and the work that we do is mostly for the American and North American and European markets. So it's a Japanese brand. It's important to understand the essence of the Japanese brand, what makes it special, to make sure, I mean, like literally on a very basic level, to make sure that it's not being treated in that generalist Asian aesthetic, and packaging that for a Western market. That's essentially our niche.
Do you remember your first significant project that you did once you had established Kata Studio here in Tokyo, and you're like, oh, it's taking off. We're able to kind of grow this finally here in Japan?
I think when we started as a post-production company on the market. And so one of our biggest clients was Nissan. We did a lot of work with Nissan. It was through TBWA. We were working with a production company called TYO. Mm-hmm. Lots of acronyms here.
Yeah.
And Nissan was very, very impressed with the work that we did. And so we were actually able to make a deal directly with Nissan to do all of the post-production on their, I think it was just their TV work. And that was huge. That was an incredible win. And I felt like that was like, okay, now we've made it. Unfortunately, that work ended up going away. And I think it went away kind of in the same way that a lot of things go away here. It's a relationship that somebody's had for a long time, and they're able to develop it through methods that aren't really suitable to me or the people that worked with me, not necessarily based on the quality of the product or what.
So a lot of relationships that go beyond work that you need to entertain and that you need to kind of establish and build over the years. And if you're not necessarily willing to take part in that, they would rather sacrifice the production quality if they don't feel like I can hang out with that person more outside of work.
I don't think that there is an actual conscious decision that says that, but I do think that those elements are at work and always working against you in Japan. It's just the way that things have worked for so long.
So in order to kind of also keep your clients and establish a production company here, you need to kind of engage in outside of work relationship building and building that trust and building the contacts to have your network here in Japan, more than maybe in the United States, where people will come to you if they like your expertise and I want this guy to do this work, and then you sign a contract, you do the job, they're happy, they come again. But in Japan, you built that over the years.
I think if you want to do domestic for domestic, yes. And I think at some point I decided that just wasn't going to be our business.
So you found your unique niche and you built Kata Studio in Japan over the last 12 years already?
Well, the niche we didn't actually figure out until probably the last 6 years. The first 6 years was trying to figure out how to do it. And for a period of time, yeah, we did try to do the socializing. We had an executive producer who was very good at that. Was very good at socializing. And then when he left, it was just when that fell into my lap, I realized that that's not the way that I work. I work by promoting the work that I do, by showing people what I do. And if they're interested in really pushing the envelope with me, then we make a good partnership. If ultimately down the line, the values are not aligned, there's going to be problems. It's not going to be a good partnership anyway.
What were some of the key milestones for Kata Studios over the last 12 years?
Okay, so I would say that one key milestone was that Nissan deal. Another key milestone was that when we first established a production department. We initially, so the American Cutters Studios is broken up into a number of different companies. So you have Cutters, Cutters is editorial, you've got Dictionary Films, which is production, you've got Another Country, which is audio, Flavor, which is design and effects. They're big. It didn't make sense for us to operate, under 5 different names when we're all in one building. So, but we did when we launched production, we launched under the name Dictionary Films. And when Dictionary first came onto the market, the clients that shared our values were very excited about being able to work with us for production. And we booked a number of big jobs initially. One was a big Nike project with White and Kennedy. Another was a launch film for a company called Global Work. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
no.
Global Work is like a Uniqlo type brand. It's a Japanese brand, but they had a Western CD that they'd hired in-house. And that was a big milestone for us. And then eventually it didn't make sense having, the confusion around having these 2 companies in the same building became too much, that it was, in trying to market for 2 companies was a bit cumbersome. So we rolled everything into the Cutter Studios name. I think another key milestone is what we have done recently, or what I have done recently, in taking the company virtual and understanding that the needs of one project are going to differ very much to the needs of the next, and that I don't need to work with an artist that is in Shibuya. I can work with an artist that's in Estonia. I can work with a colorist in New Zealand. I can work with people all over the world, and it's very liberating, and I think that when you take advantage of an opportunity like that, you take advantage of the tools that are accessible worldwide, you can provide something in Japan that's never been provided before.
That's interesting, because just before we started rolling the cameras, we were talking about how Cutter Studios grew to up to 30 people in-house, and then you've decided, or with the rest of the company, to restructure a little bit. And now it's only you, but you work with the crew that you had before on a project-by-project basis.
Yeah, when I say it's only me, I mean I'm the only full-time employee of the company, but the team is still assembled for, if this project will have this part of the team that we used to work with, this next project will have this part of the team that we used to work with.
Is this a global shift in the industry, or is this something maybe specific in Japan, or how do you see it?
I think it's definitely a global shift in the industry. And production companies are traditionally small. Most production companies have a roster of directors. When I say production companies, I mean production companies in the Western world. They'll have a roster of directors, they'll have an EP, maybe a couple of producers. There are integrated companies that have visual effects and occasionally sound, but generally they operate pretty slim. I think that the global shift is being able to move outside of your own borders and to really work. The pandemic did that. The pandemic liberated the borders, and technology has democratized the tools. So everything, finishing a commercial, I think, 2 months ago, everything needed to be finished on the Flame or Nuke. But 2 months from now, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, everything's changing little by little. So you work now with people all over the world, and you create a commercial. In your own words, what makes a good commercial?
Something that conveys the message that you intend to convey. A lot of times I find that in a commercial, the commercial becomes something different during the process. So there is an idea, there's an objective that is put forward, or usually at least observed in the client. So the client needs to move a product, or the client needs to build a brand, a sub-brand, whatever it might be. And during that process, people become so focused on the process that they forget what the actual objective was. And really delivering that message, understanding what it is that you want to convey and making sure you convey it, that's number one.
So you need to have that stuck on your computer on a little post-it note and never forget during the whole process, what is it?
You need to have somebody that is, and people reminding each other that there is an objective, that it's not just to deliver, okay, so the client is saying this now, but to be able to, to turn around and remind the client what the objective is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You said that when you arrived, you saw a lot of very low quality ads in Japan and commercials that were done on maybe lower budget. Have you seen this change over the last 12 years? Have
Yes.
you seen the landscape of commercial filmmaking in Japan change?
Well, first of all, there's been an influx of, there's been a globalization of the Japanese production market. There are, when we came to the market, there weren't any other non-Japanese production companies. But now there are a ton of small production companies that have cropped up and that are doing good work. There are improvements, that things get better. And I think that the influx of global flavor coming into Japan has made things better, has made things more diverse, has made things more interesting. I think it's less one-sided. And so, production value has gotten better. I think that I will say, and this is an area of tremendous pride, I do think that we open the door. I think that we opened the door, and when people saw what we were doing, not only the other foreigners coming to Japan, but also Japan itself saw that things could be done a little bit differently, and that was exciting.
For me, there are two types of commercial in Japan that really stand out. One is when they will do something very wacky and you wonder, well, why are they doing this? How is this supposed to sell anything? And the other one is you see the same comedians on every single commercial over Japan. It's always the same faces selling you anything and everything. Have you gotten to understand why they use this approach to always use the same comedians to advertise any kind of food, any kind of travel, any kind of service, any kind of app, any kind of beauty product, and do something that is very, very, I guess it's comedic in the context, but from a Western perspective, it's very hard to understand what was the thinking behind making that commercial.
Okay, so the more humble me will say I don't really know, but also that I do believe that there is a method in their madness. I think one thing is the interest in lasting impression versus short-term impression. And I think that the things that make you laugh, the things immediately that just kind of they boost your awareness. It's a short-term impression, but it's very effective. You do see a spike in sales. It's very product-focused. Mm-hmm. When you look at a Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola, the red can, you don't see a heck of a lot, but you see Coca-Cola products all over the place, more products than you'd ever see in the US or any other market. And they come out with something new, and that new product is showcased in a commercial, it's showcased at the convenience store, and people buy it. And there's a huge strategy built around newness. Mm-hmm. And newness doesn't last, so maybe the short-term impression is very well suited to a newness strategy, would be my guess.
Interesting. So over those 12 years, you developed the company, you work on a lot of commercials, you witnessed a change in the industry, but you also told me that you're now shifting towards making also TV dramas away from just commercials. Is that correct?
Not shifting away from commercials.
Adding to.
And that's, a lot of that is personal interest. Mm-hmm. A few years back, this was totally not even on my radar. We got a phone call, and the first phone call was from Netflix. Netflix was asking us, do you have anything you'd like to propose? I'm thinking, why are you calling a commercial production company looking for proposals? And what I learned was that Netflix first, and then Amazon and Disney later, were struggling with the dynamic here in Japan. They were given their metrics, they were given their missions out of the US, and they came over here and they needed to work with local production companies. And they realized that the systems, the communications, the processes, everything was so different. And so when they were, looking for a way around that, they thought, okay, well, who are the non-Japanese players on the market? And we were pretty much the only one. So we got the call, and that kind of was the initial spark. And so we put together, it was like 20 ideas and proposed them to Netflix, figuring, okay, so which one do you like? And ultimately, they didn't like any of them.
Oh.
So that was the first lesson in how things work very differently in the entertainment world. So in the commercial world, everything moves very fast, because by the time somebody has made a decision, there's usually 3 weeks left before you need to go into production, before a product's going to be launched, before you got to get something out there. But with TV and film, if they don't have anything good, they're not going to put it out there. And so while we were initially the company of interest for them, eventually they did learn to work with the Japanese production companies. Robot does a lot of the TV and film work for Netflix and Amazon Prime, and a number of other Japanese production companies do as well. But it was interesting. And so we started to develop some properties. Those properties are in the development stage right now. We finally figured out, okay, what it was going to take to get something across the line. It takes forever.
So they gave you the first call and sparked the interest, and now you're like, no, we're going to make something and then try to kind of present to them a finished product, so to say.
Not a finished product, a proposal. So everything that we have done so far, I mean, that's another way to do things, but everything that we've done so far is proposals. So we put together what is called a story Bible. The story Bible could be accompanied by a script or scripts in the case of a TV show, or a concept note. There's a number of different ways. Generally, the more experience you have and the more that your name is known, the less that you have to do in order to get something across the line. Having no name and no experience, we got to do a heck of a lot more.
You said just earlier that the timeline for TV, like drama production, Netflix production, and commercial is very different. Can you give us like an estimate of when you get, let's say, a contract with Nissan and you have to make a new commercial? How long is the lead time between the moment you sign the contract and the moment you have to deliver the commercial, as opposed to like a TV show, for example?
Okay, so with commercials, it really comes down to I think the particular case. The last project that I worked on for All Nippon Airways was, I think, 6 months long, starting from the initial concept stage through delivery. But some projects, I did a project recently out of Singapore that was, I think, less than 2 months from initial inquiry to delivery.
That's very short.
It's very short. You have to plan the production, you have to do all of the post, and it's pretty full on.
And then on TV, it's longer.
Well, on TV, you're talking about it's a completely different beast. So, for example, you're familiar with Squid Game?
Yeah.
I think Squid Game, the guy who the producer, creator, had been pitching Squid Game for 10 years.
Wow.
And then finally got Netflix to buy it. And then when Netflix bought it, I'm sure that production was probably from the green light to actually being on the air had to have been 18 months, 2 years, something like that.
Wow. So yeah, timelines are quite different.
Timelines are very different.
We had last year a guest coming on a podcast, Ricky, who works here also in kind of film production in Tokyo, and she works for Japanese TV.
Oh, Ricky.
Yes.
I know Ricky.
You know Ricky?
Kimono Ricky.
Yes, Kimono Ricky.
Yeah. Ricky's worked with us quite a few times.
Yeah. Well, she was saying that the TV production here in Japan is very different because they do very low budget and very fast, because they just do new, and they kind of just release a lot of low production things. Is this something you're experiencing now as well when you work maybe more with digital, like you were talking Netflix, Amazon, and Disney, or is this again different?
Well, that's the challenge that Netflix and Disney and Amazon had when they first came to the market. They were used to, Japan was used to that very kind of down and dirty. They were a TV drama. They would be shooting the 8th episode while the second episode was airing. That dynamic didn't work for the American SVODs, so they were looking for more like-minded companies. But then eventually I think they were able to work with the Japanese production companies to deliver on more of a US model.
So what are you looking for now that you're entering this more TV production and not only commercial? Because you're kind of starting from scratch, right? You said it took you 6 years to figure out how to position yourself with commercial filmmaking, and now you're discovering this new world. Do you have any goals or dreams that you're kind of aspiring to?
Honestly, I think that, once again, lots of things converging. I am very selfishly interested in pursuing my own creative work. And so over the course of the last 12 years, I built a company. I built it up to 30 people. It had departments and divisions and people reporting to people. And I found that I was doing a lot of admin. I felt like I was putting out fires. I was focusing a lot of my time on the business. And I really want to be focused on the creative. So from a very selfish perspective, I want to keep things simple enough so that I am the one that is actually steering things on the creative side. And when I do bring on additional help, it's the help doing the things that I don't really want to be doing. That's my biggest goal.
Interesting. So really kind of getting back to the roots of just making something creative. The thing that made you leave the baseball universe a little bit to go back to creative. So it seems like always coming back to that.
Always coming back to creative. And it's every time I steer away from creative, I find that I do myself a disservice and I end up doing the thing that I'm not good at. In order to do business properly, well, you have to really like business. I find that when I do business, I want to get business done and I want to get done quickly. And so it's always what I do not as well. Whereas with the creative, I'm spending, countless hours burning the midnight oil to deliver something the best it could possibly be. And I think if I'm going to put my chips on something, that's what I want to put my chips on.
On creativity, have you found that kind of the understanding of the concept, what is creative, what is not, changes in Japan when you maybe discuss a project with a Japanese director of photography or editor, that they're kind of understanding visualization of what you may have in mind as maybe the director of the project is completely different than what you're seeing because of a cultural difference?
Aesthetic, you mean?
Aesthetic, or kind of how to convey a message. We were talking about what makes a successful commercial. It's the message, but understanding the message could also be different in a cultural context.
I think especially when it comes to something like comedy, one of the things that I think there is a lot more spoon feeding, I think, in Japan to the audience. There's a common metric that is used in the commercial world, and that is the 80-year-old Oba-chan in the living room, only half paying attention to the TV, going to understand what is being communicated?
Interesting.
Whereas a Western audience, one of the key, I assume it's the same in marketing, but in film production, or especially commercial film production, you don't want to underestimate the audience. You don't want to make fun of the audience or keep the audience, or underestimate the audience's intelligence, because then they just feel like you're insulting them. So if you've got, for example, I saw, who is the Godin marketing guy? Seth
Godin, yeah.
So I think it was Seth Godin who did did a presentation and he puts an apple on the screen and then he writes the word apple underneath and he says, don't do this. Pick one. If you're going to show them the apple, show them the apple. If you're going to write the word apple, but don't treat your audience like they're infants by putting both of those on the screen. And I think that in Japan there is a tendency to want to absolutely make sure that something is conveyed beyond any kind of chance. And so there is a lot less is left up to chance.
Interesting, because I can imagine this really affects the creative process of how you could convey the message in many, many different ways, right? Because you need to, a subtle message won't work anymore.
So there was a funny circumstance when we were editing a film for Nike, and there was this baseball star who was talking about how great his haircut is, and he's bald, like he doesn't have hair, and that in itself was joke enough to the Westerners involved in the project, but to the Japanese, they wanted somebody to tsukomu. They wanted somebody to acknowledge that he didn't have hair. Like somebody to say, like, but he's bald. So ultimately, in the commercial, there was somebody who was acknowledging that the guy was bald.
It's kind of giving the cue to laugh, right?
Giving the cue to laugh, exactly. And to be honest with you, I don't know if it would have registered if you didn't have that. Or maybe it would have been confusing. And I think that's something that we build up over the course of generations. It's not something that you can just initiate and say, hey, this is the way that we're going to do comedy because it's the way that we do it in America, and that's better. And so introducing a new way of doing things it can take time, and I have experienced that with my co-conspirators here in Japan.
So back to creativity, it is necessary to maybe work with Japanese and really establish an understanding of the culture if you want to do this kind of creative work here and convey a message to a Japanese audience. Because from a Western perspective, it might be very hard to read through the lines and know where do you give the cue to laugh.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the long form projects, the TV show that we're working on is a comedy, and just understanding how the comedic timing works and what people, comedy is all about references. It's all about what you grew up with, what triggers a memory in you, and if what a Japanese person experienced when they from birth until now, no matter how well you speak the language, no matter how much you understand what is being said, if you don't have those references, you're not going to understand. And if you try to take Western references or Western references from the U.S. or from France or something like that and put them into a Japanese context, they're not going to connect. And I think that probably more than anything is where you need to assimilate, is where you need to work with Japanese people that understand the Japanese audience.
Looking back at 12 years of Kara Studio in Tokyo, would you do anything differently?
I do everything differently.
Everything.
Well, yes, I think that I would be more humble. Just in general, I think I would look at, you learn things, you watch Mad Men and you look at Don Draper and you say, okay, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm not going to give him two options and I give him one option because that's the stronger way to go. And I don't think that approach is applicable. I think that you do need to have a level of flexibility to work here. You have to have a level of humility because humility is respected more than brashness, for example, in the US. I think that I would work on understanding how to convey why a better product, why better production value or better editing or better production design is actually going to be better for not the end client, because I think that I was able to convey that very well, but why it's better for everybody across the entire process, why it's better for the, the person that is really just worried about their next promotion, or is just trying to get home before the last train for the first time in like 6 weeks. I would have more understanding. I think that I would have spent less money. There is a tendency, I think, that coming from that American advertising world, you to look like the big spender makes you look like you are, that you have it to spend. And sometimes that was done in a little bit of an irresponsible way.
So if someone is listening now to this podcast or watching the video on YouTube and is interested in getting into production or commercial filmmaking, specifically in Japan, what kind of advice would you like to give them?
I would say start by figuring out what you do that nobody else can do. And that's when I explain what our niche is. When I explained, doing domestic for domestic, there's a big line of people that are already doing that. And there were a big line of people, even if you think you can do it better, there's a big line of people that have been, doing it the other way for so long. And it's very difficult to move that, and you don't necessarily have to. But what is it that you do that nobody else can do? I wish I had asked myself that question a lot earlier and really just focused on being the best me that I can be, being the best, first of all, non-Japanese person who has a knowledge of Japan, who has a deep knowledge of how advertising and film production is done in the US as well as Japan, and can really bridge that gap, be that person at the intersection of Japan and the world. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for this good advice and sharing all your stories. We covered a lot of topics today. Do you feel like there's something we haven't really touched upon that you think is important to bring up, whether it's your work at Cutter Studio, a funny client, a difficult client, or maybe some lessons learned along the process on how the industry works here, that you would like to maybe add something to?
Gosh, I can't remember what we covered and what we haven't covered. I felt like I've just been talking for the last hour.
Well, that's what you're here for.
Well, I'd be interested to know what it looks like from the other side, what it looks like from the outside. Cutter Studios has been obviously on the market in Tokyo for the last 12 years, an important 12 years. I think this industry has not changed in the more in the last 100 years than it did in the last 12. What do you see? If I can turn it back on you, what do you see of Cutter Studios? What do you see of the advertising and production industry in Japan? Do you see it? Is it something that is completely emerging now, or maybe you see that it hasn't really changed at all?
Well, I think it will have to change soon, because you mentioned that one of the key metrics for a commercial is the 80-year-old Oba-chan in a living room that's half paying attention going to understand this ad. In a few years from now, this will not be the target audience anymore, right? There will be a younger generation that's more tech savvy, that's more maybe internationally open, that you will have to address commercials to. So in a way, commercial filmmaking will have to change and adapt to the message, and maybe the cues to laugh will change as well. But I think I'm way less experienced than you in this field to maybe have a more solid opinion and answer on the topic.
All right. Well, then, okay. Then I'll change the question. I won't change the question, but I'll kind of riff on that. Our world was built on TV. Mm-hmm. It was built on the TV model. Everything is still the TV model, and there's this emerging non-TV model. There is what they call the YouTube creator, what they call the Instagram creator, and there is no professional workflow for that yet in Japan. And I'm curious. I mean, there's if I was you asked me what my advice to somebody that's up and coming now. Well, where I to a certain extent see things going is in the direction of self-publishing. If you want to create an audience, if you want people to believe that you can capture an audience, I think that you are going to need to prove that you can create an audience, that you can generate an audience. And so maybe my advice to people that are coming up in it now is to figure out ways that they can put their stuff out there without having somebody have to commission it. And that's something that I'm looking at the moment as well. And you look at that, the process that I described about getting a TV show across the line, about the perils of the commercial world and how you're perceived and having to navigate the socializing aspect of sales. An audience generated doesn't really lie. And so if there's any way to do something and prove that you can do it, that seems to be the most straightforward. And the tools are democratized. The tools are there.
Well, I think you said something that's important, which is put yourself out there, you and your work. If you're not out there, nobody will find you. And showing that you can do something instead of saying that you can do it usually is more powerful as a message.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming all the way from Tokyo. And I think you have a Hanshin Tigers game waiting for you and your son, who's been very impatient to go see some baseball today.
Yes, I take him to a lot of baseball.
Okay, good for him. Learning something. It took me a long time to understand baseball. I never got into it. I saw my first game 10 years ago in Japan. It was Yokohama Bay Stars against Chunichi Dragons.
All right.
I did not understand anything. I thought it was very boring. Came a few years ago for the second time to watch a Hanshin Tigers game. Thought it was super boring. And the only home run I missed because I was talking to my friend. But then the last World Series, not World Series.
Japan Series?
Yeah, no, when Japan won the World Championship.
Oh, WBC?
Yeah. And I saw all of Japan cheering Ohtani and cheering their team and like watching the games and like, I got it. So maybe I'll have to go again to watch some games.
I think baseball is a unique sport, and I was saying that earlier with kind of the inside baseball thing. It's a culture.
You have to understand it. You have to experience it a few times, and then maybe.
Well, you can with some time.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we will be back again next week. Bye. Are you looking for another podcast episode to listen to next? If you like the one you just listened to, I'm sure you'll also enjoy the one that I've selected and linked in the description down below. Go check it out.